Hello everyone. Today we're talking about the Texas Revolution, right? So I figure that as Texans, the Texas Revolution should be one of the eras that we're more familiar with. However, I do find myself in class realizing that a lot of students are not very knowledgeable about the the subject. I mean, there's a lot of confusion or plain, incorrect information about it, right? So I'm gonna try to do my best to cover the most important aspects of the Texas Revolution and basically set the record straight on all of this confusion or misinformation, right? So let's get started. All right, so we're going to look at this video from the History Channel. It's called Why Mexico Banned Immigration from the U.S. And this video basically covers the road to the Texas Revolution, and I'm just gonna add some important commentary to get the full picture of the Texas Revolution. All right.
In 1830, Mexico banned immigration from the United States. Why? Well, one reason, slavery. But for the whole picture, we have to look to the history of Texas.
Look, the reason Mexico banned immigration to Texas is not necessarily slavery, to be honest. It's gonna be an underlying cause, but it's basically that there's an overwhelming amount of Anglos, right? And these Anglos are not following the rules Mexico agreed on, all right? One of those rules being slavery, but not the only one. Okay?
Before Texas was a U.S. state and its own nation, it was part of Mexico's northern state of Coahuila y Tejas. But the region was sparsely populated and vulnerable to Native American tribes seeking to reclaim the land. So in the early 1820s,
these are mainly Plains Indians. I'm not sure they're necessarily trying to reclaim the land, but they're basically Comanches, a lot of Apaches, and these guys are, they raid, right? So they made it very dangerous for any settlers wanting to move into the regions. If you look at a map of what is called the Comancheria, it covers a lot of what is present-day Texas. Right, so a lot of Mexican settlers did not want to move to what is now Texas. However, a lot of people from the southern states of the U.S. were willing to take that risk. Right, so Mexico basically opened up the doors for those people.
Mexico opened its northern territory to some American immigrants with the idea that the Americans would protect the region from falling under Native American control. To entice American settlers, the government offered cheap land grants. In 1823, Stephen F. Austin became the first to receive a grant and the right to settle 300 families. Others soon followed. In exchange, the settlers agreed to speak Spanish, convert to Catholicism, become Mexican citizens, and abstain from keeping slaves. But the Americans weren't so good at holding up their end of the bargain.
Yeah, what's going to happen is that unfortunately Mexico believes that the American settlers will just obey the rules, but they don't have enough people making sure that they're actually obeying the rules, right? In other words, they're just basically going up by their promise, but there's not enough enforcement of it, right? So most of the settlers don't want to be Catholic. They don't even bother learning Spanish, and they simply don't follow the rules. This keeps going on for a couple years, close to a decade, before Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna is gonna basically change things up.
With little oversight from the Mexican government, most remained Protestant, spoke English, and didn't give a hoot about Mexican law. With the cotton industry booming, cheap farmland in Tejas attracted droves of cotton farmers, and cotton farms meant slaves. By 1829, Mexico realized it had a real problem. The American population in Tejas had swelled to nearly 20,000, making it practically impossible for the government to enforce the law. Mexico rightly feared it would lose Tejas to the Americans. So on April 6, 1830, in a bid to maintain control and keep slavery out of its country, Mexico passed a law intended to curb the flood of immigration from the United States to Tejas. It didn't work.
It's called the Law of April 6, 1830, and it basically prohibited more migration from southern settlers to Texas, right? I think the ratio was like 8-1, so a lot of Americans and very few Mexicans, right? And of course, Mexico passes this law, but not enough enforcement of it.
The Americans kept coming, and the law further strained Mexico's delicate relationship with the settlers. Then, to make matters worse, in 1835, Mexican President Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna repealed the 1824 Mexican Constitution. He moved to centralize Mexican politics, stripping Tejas and the other Mexican states of their right to self-govern. And all hell broke loose.
Yeah, before that, Santana became president in 1833. Santana is going to be 11 times president of Mexico. So during his first tenure as president, he's more of a general, so he doesn't like to govern from Mexico City a lot. So one of the things that he's going to do is he's going to dissolve Congress, and basically eventually he's going to basically get rid of the idea of federalism, right? And he's going to centralize all the power, and by all means just basically get rid of the constitution that all the settlers agreed on, right? So in the Texas Declaration of Independence of March 2nd, 1836, this is one of the main grievances against the Mexican government.
Settlers saw this attack on their rights as the final straw, their only option, rebellion. But Santa Anna was prepared to put any dissent down, and violently. Now,
it's important to make clear their only option is not rebellion, right? The option they prefer is rebellion, but it's definitely not their only option. I think a lot of the American settlers do not know very well who's Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, right? He's a very controversial figure in Mexican history, but he is a bit of a narcissist who has this, complex, kind of like a Napoleonic complex. Not necessarily Napoleonic complex because he's not very small, but he wants glory, right? And he's willing to go to battlefields, right? He's one of those guys who's going to be president, but he's going to be leading people in the battlefield, right? He's not a great general, to be honest, but he sees himself as the Napoleon of the West, right? That's the way he saw himself, right? So probably the Americans are not aware of how much Santa Anna is of a dictator, how oppressive he could be. So he's not gonna let a group of settlers just outright say like we're not gonna follow rules, right? He's a dictator and he likes to rule with an iron fist.
1836, he marched his troops north. Remember the Alamo? On February 23, 1836, Santa Anna launched a 13-day siege on the settlers' Catholic mission turned fortress. When he finally penetrated the walls, he slaughtered nearly every person inside, ending the battle, but not the war. The settlers called in reinforcements from the states, promising land and free passage. 1 month later, General Sam Houston launched a surprise attack at San Jacinto.
So what happened at the Alamo, I know they called it a 13-day siege. For 12 days, they really don't do anything. They're just kind of hoping that Sam Houston is going to come and reinforce the people that have taken the San Antonio de Valero mission that it was known as the Alamo. But once Santa Anna realizes Sam Houston is not going to make his way, he just decides to, breach the walls. Santa Anna has way bigger of an army than the around 200 people that are in the Alamo, and because he likes to bask in the glory, he doesn't care about losing enormous amounts of soldiers. So I think about 1,000 Mexican soldiers will perish in the siege of the Alamo versus around the 200 people approximate that died in the Alamo. Right now, just to clear up the small myth of the Alamo that there's no survivors, men that did not fight, the non-combatant, like slaves, uh, slaves, women, children, survived the Alamo. When they say no survivors, they mean people who fought. Those people did not survive the Alamo.
Capturing Santa Anna and forcing him to sign away Mexican ownership of Texas. The newly independent Texans were psyched. As an independent entity, they would be free to join the United States, where slavery was legal.
Now, by this time, this is April, I think it's April 21st, 1836. By this time, Texas had already declared independence, right? Texas declared its independence in March 2nd, 1836. And again, the reasons for the independence, at least the ones that are listed there, do not mention slavery, right? They do mention, the not allowing them to continue settling, denying them Mexican citizenship. They mention things like tearing up the Constitution, dissolving the Congress. They get very political. Now that's what they list as their grievances. Slavery is an underlying reason, but one of the reasons I mentioned that slavery is not really that, the main catalyst for the Texas Revolution is because by this time, the video skips this part, right? But by this time, the Mexican government had made arrangements. They had made some concessions with the Anglo settlers, right? With the Americans. They basically told them that they could keep the slaves, but they couldn't bring anymore, right? So Mexico saw where they're bringing slaves, and they're willing to make some concessions, like don't bring any more slaves. In other words, don't expand slavery any further. But they keep on bringing slaves, right? So Mexico, they do care about the issue of slavery. They abolished slavery in 1824, but the reality is that it's not the main reason why Texas declares its independence.
Oh, the irony. Slavery, which had greatly influenced their bid for independence, now practically extinguished any chances they had for statehood. Because back in the US, Congress was grappling with the spread of slavery as their nation expanded westward. Annexation of Texas would bring in another slave state. As Congress debated how to maintain the balance, Texas remained in a state of limbo. For nearly 10 years, Texas struggled as an independent nation, suffering from economic instability and border disputes with Mexico. Finally, in 1845, Texas was admitted to the Union, but it was short-lived. 15 years later, Texas would secede from the U.S. as the country headed towards a civil war over the issue of slavery.
Correct. I agree 100%. What the media mentions at the end as the conclusion that slavery will eventually rear its ugly head 15 years later and causing the American Civil War is 100% correct. Slavery will be the underlying cause in the secession of 1860 and then the eventual Civil War in the U.S., right? The other point I wanted to make is that, and I know I already made it in the video, I just want to expand a little bit here. I think the video seems to imply that slavery is the number one reason for the Texas Revolution, or at least that's what I'm getting from it. But I wouldn't agree that slavery is the number one reason for the Texas Revolution, or even one of the main causes, right? So I think the video seems to imply that the Mexican government is so upset about slavery in Texas that it's willing to go and crush the Texas rebellion, or that the Texans are so upset about Mexico abolishing slavery, I'm sorry, that they're rebelling against the Mexican government, right? So this is not the case here. The main issues I see with the Texas Revolution, the main causes for it, I always see it as this horrible administration of the northern territories by the Mexican government, right? So it's mostly about Santa Anna, tearing the Constitution, becoming a dictator, centralizing the powers, this kind of like feeling of oppression by the Texan settlers because they want to go back to the Constitution of 1824, right? So it's mostly about the Mexican government not knowing how to handle the problems, allowing way too many Americans coming over, then not knowing how to control the American flow. And the solution they see is iron fist. And that's not going to work with the American settlers, right? So it's mostly about the bad administration. And you see it a lot in the Texas Revolution, the idea that they complain a lot about we want to go back to the old Constitution, right? You don't see a lot of the idea of they're not letting us have slaves. It's mostly about, the government has become oppressive, the president has become a dictator, he centralized the government, and, we just want to go back to our old ways, right? So those rebellions revolve around that, right? So when Santana travels to San Antonio and all different things, he's mostly trying to crush the rebellion that has been rebelling because of those reasons that I just mentioned, right? So, anyways, I just wanted to make that point there about the main cause for the Texas Revolution. And this is all I have for you today. If you do have any questions, let me know. I'll be around, and be safe, guys. Okay, see you.